Okay, so we're going to talk through the fitting of an Australian cistern. In the typical Australian cistern fitting, what you have is a Geberit inlet valve, which is watermark approved. You also have a Geberit dual flush valve, drop button flush valve with a separate button, dual flush. We have the back nut for fixing. We have a series of nuts and washers for sealing the fixing holes, and we have an internal stopper to block off one of the inlet holes. Okay, so the first step would be to correctly set the two pieces of apparatus. So what we have here is a guidance sheet for setting the correct settings on each one. So I have here an Astoria Deco cistern. I will now set the inlet valve to the correct setting, remove the locking nut, twist to allow for adjustment, and I'm going to set it to number 4. Okay, and I'll replace the nut to ensure that this can't be moved. Okay. When it comes to the main valve, we've already trimmed the side arms, which we're required to do to ensure that the valve will come low enough to fit inside the tank. And again, I'm going to follow the settings on this sheet. Main setting number 2, which refers to these side arms. So what I do is I simply adjust the side arm to number 2, and this also corresponds to this part here, so this clips onto number 2 also. Okay. The next part would be to trim the overflow tube, which is normally done before the assembly, and again we follow the sheet which guides us to overflow trim number 9, which is carried out here. You can see the pen mark. Next is to set the half flush, which is the smaller of the two flush functions. This is done by simply pulling this pin towards you and sliding the half flush up and down. In this case we're going to set to number 3, and to set it at number 3 you just push the pin back in. That now secures it. And last is to set what's called the dead water setting, which is how much water is left in the tank. This is done by sliding this up and down, which opens up this aperture. In this case the dead water setting is required at 0, which is marked here. Okay. Once the valves are all prepared, ready to install, we begin to install them in the tank. Now normally all our tanks come pre-fitted and pre-sealed, pre-tested for leaks, but in this case I'm just going to talk you through how to put it together. Okay, so the flush valve goes in, ensuring that this rubber seal is in place to make sure that it's sealed. Simply goes into the tank and is tightened up on the back side with the back nut. In this case I'm not using any tools, but in general you should probably use a wrench. That should be hand tightened and then another quarter turn with the wrench. Okay. Now for the inlet valve. It is possible to install the inlet valve either left hand or right hand depending on your installation. So I remove the back nut, ensuring that the sealing washer is in place. I will insert it into the tank and again tighten up from the rear with the back nut. Again hand tighten and then another further quarter turn with a wrench would be adequate to create a seal. As you can see there, what it's important to do is ensure that this is moved away from the back wall so that there's no chance of any snagging of the float cups. There needs to be clear space around it and around the flush valve. Okay, so now that the inlet valve and the flush valve are installed, we need to block off the other hole. This is quite simply done by placing the rubber wash over the back of it, inserting into the cistern, and again tightening up from the rear with the back nut, hand tighten, and then a further quarter turn with a wrench would be adequate. Okay, so once the tank is assembled, all the parts are in it correctly. We have in here marked an Australian waterline, which I'm not sure you can make out on this film, but it's there, punched Australian. There's various other waterlines in there, but the Australian one is always marked AUS. At this stage it would be necessary to attach this to the pan. Now, we don't have the pan here, however what you have here is a series of bolts and nut. The bolt goes in with the rubber washer into the tank. This would pass through the ceramic of the pan. Okay, so once both of these are installed, it sits onto the pan, and then from the underside of the toilet pan you secure it with the washer and then the nut. At this stage it would be best to test the system, put some water in it, make sure there's no major leaks before the final plumbing in is carried out. From here, once it's all installed, tested with the water running, you're happy with the installation, there's no leaks, what you can do then is now the final step would be to attach the push button. So the lid goes on, push button which comes separately goes onto the valve, onto the top of the valve, and is simply tightened on, and what you've got there is the two different flushes, and that's how you do it. Thanks.